Welcome to another episode of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Mike Roderick, and with me today is Mr. Sean Oriano. How you doing, Sean?
I am doing pretty good. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. We're kicking off another episode in our Kali Linux series, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about something called SQL injection. And Sean, this is something that many websites have to worry about. It seems like today's websites are all database driven, so they've got some type of database behind them, and so we need to be able to test to make sure that that database is, or the web app and the web server and the database behind it aren't susceptible to this type of attack, right?
Yes, absolutely. And it's very much true that there's just a wealth of websites nowadays that are running a database of some sort as their back end. It's just allows for a more dynamic and more immersive experience when people look at that website and visit it. They can retrieve information, they can do queries of different sorts, they can do just all sorts of really cool things, and then you can even extend it beyond an individual site. And they are even nowadays having databases across multiple sites and organizations, all pulling information from one another to even give it a better experience, which some may find kind of scary. Then they tie all this stuff together. So it's something that you as a pen tester are going to at least have to have some familiarity with to be able to do some basic pen tests with. So we've got a fair amount of tools inside of Kali that can help us do this and really kind of check to see what conditions exist. So we've got tools that can help us test SQL injections, and then we also have, just to make sure we're clear on this, we also have tools that we saw way earlier in our segments that are specifically targeted towards testing databases themselves, even without the SQL injection part being anywhere near that equation. So we looked at one that cracked passwords and extracted UIDs and all that from Oracle. It was purpose-built for that. There's ones for MySQL and even SQL Server. So the big ones they've got covered. Plus, there's ones that are really tools that in here for working with databases that are really agnostic. They'll work with anyone out there. But do remember that we got ones for working with the web apps that are driven on the back end by a database, and then we have stuff that also goes towards the database itself without the web application. For what we're doing for this section, though, is we're just really focused on the SQL injection part and what a SQL injection is, what leads to it, and then kind of discussing what tools you have available to you and where that could take you.
All right, so when we talk about SQL injection, then we're really not talking about a flaw on the database server itself, right? I mean, it's doing what it's supposed to do. So SQL injection, Sean, that's more on the application side and the way it processes and hands off data to that database?
Yeah, in theory, you could have some flaws in the back end that are making it worse, I guess, as a way really to look at it. Just kind of bring it to a level that's even nastier than it would be otherwise. But generally, you're talking SQL injection, you're talking something that someone has taken a database and embedded it in some sort of web application, and the construction of, or the merging, I guess, if you want to look at it that way, of the database, and that front end web application are making the problem, come to light. And if you really look at it closely, it's probably, and however that person constructed that front end, is allowing the SQL injection to occur in the first place.
Yeah, because you've got some kind of web application. Maybe a user's going to a logon page, so they've got a form on that web page, and you can type in your username and you can type in your password, and then you got code on the back end that's maybe PHP or whatever you're using, MySQL. You got some code back there on that server that's generating a query that's saying, hey, I want you to go look up in that database Mike Roderick. Here's the password he typed in. Let's verify he typed the right password. So it's compiling that information that you inputted, sending it back to that code. The code's doing what it's got to do, generating the SQL statement, and then transmitting it to the database server. The database server is just processing the information. And it's supposed to look it up and see whether or not you used the right password, right? SQL injection, instead of putting in a password, I might put in a command that says, hey, select all from, some kind of SQL statement. And if you're not doing any checks on the data that I'm putting in, or if that code on the back end is not looking for anything unusual, it's going to wrap up whatever I typed in and send it to the database, and the database is just going to execute it. So if I said delete all, or something like that, that's really what SQL injection is when we're getting our commands executed against your database, and that should never be allowed to happen, right?
Yeah, that really definitely should not be an event that is allowed to proceed like that. And there's a number of things that can lead to it, but probably the biggest one is not doing some sort of input validation when someone provides something to be put into a form. It's not checked to see is it what should be put there, and then even further, is it sanitized before it goes into the database itself. Little mistakes like that, which may not seem like a big problem at the time when you're developing the thing, can lead to monumental problems later. In fact, if you really kind of look at SQL injections as a whole and look at the impact they've had and just how high up on the scale it is as far as seriousness, it's right in the top 3. It's always in the top 3 of problems that occur in the security field. Now, it's not something that happens every day, but it is something that when it happens, the results tend to be pretty spectacular when they occur. And we've seen that. There's been numerous cases where that's been the situation. Sony was one example there. Plus a bunch of other ones you could point to. I believe Home Depot and their disclosure was one, and you can keep going on and on and on and on with this, with inadvertent disclosure of personal information, and that causes a whole bunch of things that that company now has to deal with. Then there's the technical side. They have to figure out why that actually occurred. So they got the legal, the technical, and just customer confidence. Once you lose your customers, it's very hard to get that trust back with them. Target saw that when they had their problems. So this is something that you definitely want to take care of and make sure it's really not something that exists and can cause you any nastiness. Because like I said, it's one of the top 3. It's not necessarily the easiest thing to exploit, but when you can exploit it, yeah, it really, you really kind of notice the pain pretty quickly with it.
Yeah, if they're doing that SQL injection, again, they're just executing SQL commands. I mentioned like maybe deleting a database or deleting rows out of a table. That would be bad for a business, obviously, but most likely they've got a backup. They might lose a little bit of time. They lose some orders and things like that. It's going to be bad, but it is recoverable. The big issue is, like you said, if I'm not doing a delete statement, I'm doing a select. Think about all the things that they're storing on their customers, right? How many of you said, remember me at this website? How many of you have said, store my credit card number on file because I don't want to have to break out my wallet or purse and type it in every time I go order something. So it's just more convenient to say, oh, store it on file. Well, that means Best Buy or Sony or Target now has your credit card on file. So if they're susceptible to a SQL injection attack, guess what they're going to get? Your credit card information. So think twice about taking that easy way out about storing your credit card. But yeah, so that that's the kind of thing that can happen with these SQL injections. They're attacking that database, and that database is what stores all that information, whether it's customer information, healthcare information, information about products, and things, all the stuff that's driving those dynamic websites. And with SQL injection, they're basically able to run whatever commands they want against your SQL server, whether that's removing things, modifying things, just navigating somewhere else, taking over the server itself, or the big one, retrieving data, unauthorized retrieval of information, and that's what SQL injection can cause.
And also, if you recall from our exploration of this topic in the CEH, you'll recall that you can even go beyond even just extracting data and modifying data and stuff of that nature. You can go right past the data itself, and if that database is configured incorrectly or somebody just overlooks something, it is possible to execute commands all the way out to the operating system itself, and even start mapping the network, and uploading and downloading files. That vulnerability is there. Just if someone has left a configuration setting one way or the other. So it could be, kind of to go back to the beginning, is it always something regarding the web application and the merging of the database in that front end itself? Yeah, the majority of time it is, but there's also this other thing that when you have the database misconfigured, if someone does get through this, that something's misconfigured in the back end can just step it up and make it even worse. If someone finds that setting or find that you missed it, and they are in a position where they can get out to the operating system, they might very well choose to take that route and go just one step further. And once they're there and they've got access to the operating system, they may very well have very, very privileged access at that point. And if they have that, then it's anybody's guess what they want to do at that point, because the attacker really has kind of a blank slate. They can start creating new user accounts for themselves. They can start uploading or uploading files to that, or downloading files from another location and then executing those on there. They could just do a lot that could cause you to have a very, very, very bad day. So do remember that there's other things other than just grabbing data and causing mischief on the database. You can go right on through into the system itself and cause harm there.
Absolutely. Yeah, scary, and it's surprising to see how many SQL servers are still susceptible. There's lots of patches, depending on the version of, if you're doing a Microsoft server or if you're using, MySQL, there's ways to secure against this. And as Sean has stated already, one of the biggest things that we can do is just to make sure they're not allowed to even start the process. If I've got a field on a form on a web page, and if I'm doing any kind of checks on that to make sure there are no special characters or SQL commands, because a lot of it has to do with like putting a couple dashes in there to make the SQL server think that it's a comment, to ignore everything, those kind of things. If you can prevent that, they can't even start the SQL injection attack. So it's really easy to protect against, yet it's surprising how many, because you get people that are, at least what I see, Sean, is I see you've got your database admin setting up the database, you got your web app developers over here that are working on that, and they're talking to each other and they're saying, hey, we need a database to store this and that and the other, but they don't really ever get together and talk about, hey, let's make sure that we're not doing this, we're not doing that. And those web app guys probably aren't database people, right? They know their code and how to design these web pages. They're not real familiar with SQL other than how to pass these commands back to it. So a lot of times it's just poor communications, poor configuration that leads to the susceptibility of this.
Yeah, I really think you hit the nail on the head, on that when you talk about, the two groups working on this, and and maybe not sharing information as well as they should be. I mean, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised as to look at a web developer and say that they are not the best at knowing the SQL language, nor do they understand all the intricacies of databases. Databases are not something anybody that really knows a database is probably not going to tell you, oh, that's easy. It's just not going to happen. So those two things are very complex, and they usually have their own people that do it. And if they're working together, they don't necessarily have really good information sharing. So that can lead to problems right there. But I would add into this whole thing is the knowledge of the SQL language itself, which is really cuts to the root of this problem. If someone's able to get that access and the system's vulnerable to that, they have to know the SQL language to do this. And the knowledge of the SQL language isn't something that is really good knowledge. At least it's not something that you can just go out and find quite easily. It's something that there's people out there that have it, to be sure, and then there's even a smaller percentage of that know it really, really, really well. So you have to have a good command of this to really take advantage of this of these specific flaws.
All right, so let's take a look, Sean. We kind of explained what a SQL injection attack is, and we understand that concept now, that it's going to allow somebody to possibly send commands against my SQL database. They might do damage to that database, delete it, retrieve records, insert information, create users, or even worse, go beyond the database and hit the server itself and got whatever they want to do beyond that, right? Because typically my database is behind my corporate firewall, right? It's not out in my web server, my front end sitting out that DMZ. If they've made it into my database server, that's my back end. That's behind the corporate firewall. Yep. Now they're on my internal network, and the damage they can do from there is tremendous, right? There's a lot of potential there. Yeah,
they've gotten pretty far if they've gotten to that point where they punch through, punch through and got through your whole DMZ and gotten to that, what I like to say is a soft candy center, and gotten that into that database. So you really do want to thwart that. And so the challenge is for you as a pen tester is to be able to check for these things and really get a good handle on, do those things actually exist, and what is the specific nature of them, and do I have any recommendations or way to fix this? Now as a pen tester, I could sit here and tell you, go out and learn SQL. Oh yeah, sure, let's go out and learn SQL, no problem. It's all after I learn how to do brain surgery, I'll take care of that. I'm not necessarily going to tell you to do that. I'm going to tell you should at least have a really rudimentary understanding of it. That's the very least you need, and beyond that, you'll start to acquire more. I don't expect you to be like a DBA. If you're not already one now, or you don't have that in your plans, I'm not going to tell you to go ahead and grab that. But you should have that understanding of what the SQL language is and kind of what it looks like. But having said that, the other thing that's going to help you is that we do have tools that check for those vulnerabilities that can make it easier for you. Now, as far as Kaylee's concerned and pen testing in general, we typically, we're going to encounter three types of three databases out there. There's going to be a SQL Server from Microsoft, then there'll be Oracle sitting out there, and then MySQL. So those are the three. Yes, I'm aware there's more than that out there, but those tend to be the three that appear in the greatest numbers. If you have something else than that, it doesn't mean that you're left out in the cold. There actually are tools in Kaylee itself that are completely, I use the term agnostic. They don't care what you've got in the back end. All they care is that you got a system and it uses SQL, and they will test against it. Nice. Okay, so we do have solutions that can work with you and get a result. So you don't need to acquire those really in-depth DBA and SQL development and skills of that nature. I mean, if you want to, hey, that's your call, but you don't have to do that. Right. So having said that, what we'll take a look at is the types of tools that we have sitting out there that can do SQL stuff. Pretty much the SQL stuff that we're concerned with for web applications, they're all going to be tucked away under web applications of that menu, and under our database exploitation. I mean, they're really easy to find. You can see what we have on here, and we're not going to worry about doing running all these against an actual web application. I guess it is worthwhile adding when we're going through this topic is this topic of SQL injection. We did go through it quite a bit, and the CEH. There were actually samples all in there. So if you want to see specifically some samples of that, how that's working, if you don't already know that or want to take a closer look at it or review, that's already been done. So, and it was done quite well over there. So. It was done quite well because I didn't do it. He did it. I don't touch SQL, So I stay as far away from that as I can. So my fingers like no. All right, but what we have, is this database exploitation section. What we have here is the tools we have. We have the aptly named BBQ SQL.
I like that.
It's kind of a funny one. The barbecue SQL, and some guys even got the tips for a good barbecue, which you can't really argue with that, right?
Right.
It's got something for everybody. So we have this tool out here. This one's specifically designed to query a web app and test against it. So you can tell it what it's going to go against in specific parameters when it's going after a web application. So if you had a web application in mind, you'd gather the information it has here, where it is, and the page, or specifically like the form you're going to be going after. You could put it there under URL, and then anything else you needed to put in to actually make that work, you could just drop that in here. Now.
Yeah, you can see right there in that URL that it's creating where it's going. It's got the HTTP : and then index.php question mark, right? That's going to be that HTTP. Gosh, I'm not a web guy. I think that's a post statement. But so you've got that username equals user, password equals, and then behind that you can see where they've got that injection. You know, that's where that malicious code is going to reside. So it's just going to try to submit that to the URL, pop those in the fields, and see what that database does, or see what that web application does, see if it submits it.
Yeah. So this is going to be helping you out and automate it, and so you can see it's pretty configurable. I could go through this list in here and just choose a number and drop the appropriate information in, and it would in turn be able to feed that to the web application accordingly. So I'll go back to the main menu. The other thing we have in here as far as options go. You can see other deals that you can have to export information, maybe use it and test against something else. Mm-hmm. You can even see at the bottom the queries that you can start throwing different types of queries in and everything in there. So you've got quite a bit of configurability in this specific tool. This tool should be fine working against most SQL Server databases without really any problem. Outside of those ones, maybe Oracle, stuff like that, you may have limited success. I mean, just look at the name of the tool. It's BBQ SQL. Mm-hmm. It's really kind of designed for SQL Server. I also think something that's worth mentioning, if you haven't really paid attention to the colored text up top, mm-hmm. is if you look at it, this integrates with something else we saw earlier on in our series. It integrates with SET, the social engineering toolkit. Nice. So, and underneath the menus are there. We didn't show it in here, mm-hmm. But we did show the menus, but we didn't show that specific option because we're going to wait till now to talk about SQL injections. But you do have the ability to construct the social engineering campaign that brings in SQL injections as part of it, because maybe you can get someone to click on a link or something like that will carry out the attack for you.
Nice.
So that's kind of a neat thing that you have. Once you've gone through and you configured everything, then you can see, right, it's as simple as just tapping 5 and boom, it will start running whatever you stuck in there against that SQL database and spit back the results. As it gets them, and it's got a pretty good just in case you need to work with this. It's got a pretty good help system in here. No, it doesn't have the help system really built in well here. It's got, if you can see, it's got right here and under the help section, it directs you right to their GitHub site where you can get all sorts of stuff. They have README files and Word docs, everything up there, really documenting everything that you need to know about this tool if you're going to deploy it as part of your pen test.
Right. Yeah, that's a good one then. And then you got like SQL Ninja and SQL SUS. So they got a few different tools in there that we can use to work against these web applications that might be database driven. As you said here, we're really talking about SQL injection, but vulnerability analysis, that might be another thing that we do at this point. And they've got a whole bunch of database tools there. They got, as you were saying, that Oracle scanner, and SQL map, and just the list goes on and on. So a lot of different options that we can use, again, to test that database, test that web application, see if it's vulnerable to SQL injection.
Yeah, they've really brought a lot to the table, and the stuff that Mike's talking about. I open up the menu on here. Maybe we can zoom that up here, because I'm blocking it. But the part of the menu, you kind of get the idea, though. Mm-hmm. You can see, just how many tools there are there for just checking a database. So the cool thing I like to think of when you look at something like this is that they're bringing a lot of stuff that can ease the burden that you would have had before of having to type the stuff in manually. They've eased the burden of that. They've made it so you can just get an understanding of these tools and start just shooting stuff at the database itself without having to do too much. But once you get beyond there, then beyond just doing the basic SQL injections to see if it's vulnerable to it, then yeah, you're probably going to have to consult with someone that really knows SQL and a web applications developer to really get a good handle, on it. It's also just FYI worth pointing out that some of the stuff we talked about yesterday, we saw Vega yesterday, and we saw W3AF yesterday. If you recall, those tools also included a section where they would say there's a SQL injection vulnerability here. So you actually have already seen some tools that also include the ability to check for this as part of their default functionality. They will find those and say, boom, 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 boom. Here's the problems that we have that are fall under the banner of SQL injections. So that's kind of a neat thing. So they got you covered. But yeah, if you're not a SQL person, there's only so much they can do. They're not going to hold your hand and walk you through how to fix it. They're just going to say, there you go. You may be stuck in a position where you have to just present a report saying, yes, you're vulnerable to it, and you give the recommendation to have their DBA and their web app guy look at it, or you may have to call in a teammate or something to have that you trust to work on that with you to really kind of make sure that you've got that properly assessed before you put it on your report. So, but that's kind of the thing, is that you've got the bases covered here as far as SQL injections go. You'll also notice when you go through some of these tools in here. I mean, you've got this is one called SQL Ninja. Is another one. This one works with several different tools out there. I mean, and what I kind of like about this one, or I think it's worth actually pointing out on this, is if you go through the list of stuff that it can actually check for, you got this mode option. There's some stuff on here we already talked about in the CEH as being potentially problematic. Specifically, what do we got? We have right here the XP command shell. We were just talking a moment ago about you can get out to the operating system, be able to interact with it through the database. Well, on SQL Server, the older versions, this is still available. As I understand, it's even available in the newest version. It's just disabled in the newer versions. The older versions had this enabled by default. So if you didn't disable it and you used and someone was doing a SQL injection against you and found that, they could potentially push right on past the database into the OS itself. Yeah. So you've got the ability here to check right for that.
That's a stored procedure that if it's not disabled, somebody could definitely run and launch a shell. And when it says command shell, I mean that's a system level access shell that you could get to open up. So very dangerous.
Yeah. So it's got a lot here, and then you can even see under the mode as we go further down in here, it's got the ability to integrate with Metasploit. So a tool that we're going to talk about next week. Other things, brute force the system admin account. It can go directly after that. So it's got some pretty powerful things that it can do on its own.
And that's a common one there too. I can't tell you how many databases I see set up that still use the old mixed mode authentication, where you're not just using Windows authentication, you're using authentication for accounts that are stored on that SQL server. And that SA account should be disabled if it's not being used, and you shouldn't use the mixed mode anyway. But yeah, if somebody has that turned on, that's an easy one to hammer away at. So lots of good stuff, Sean. When we look at these databases are a big vulnerability, and it's primarily, a lot of times, it's not the database itself, although, as we saw, there are tools we can use because SQL, MySQL, Oracle, I mean, there's still applications, right? And they still have vulnerabilities. They need to be patched. We've got scanners that we can use to scan them to try to find those vulnerabilities. When we're looking at SQL injection, it's that application not processing that data or allowing certain commands to be sent back to that SQL server. And so it comes to making sure that web app is developed properly. And as a pen tester, we're not so worried about typically fixing the problem, right? We've got to find it and report it in. And Callie gives us all the tools I need to do that right here in this operating system. So pretty easy to do. Yeah,
I would say, yeah, you're I'd agree with your statement on that. As a pen tester, I'd say we're typically not expected to deal with something like this. They might ask you for suggestions on it, but you've got to kind of really figure out if that's going outside your scope of knowledge, pretty quickly, because a lot of pen testers that I've encountered, self included, not SQL experts. I can tell you, what SQL is, and I can go through the basics of it, but no, I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of it. It's not something I have that level of mastery of. So if you start asking me ways to fix it, unless you got something misspelled or something in there, I ain't fixing it. So it's not going to be, it's not something that I have. But I do know people that know SQL and are aware of those things that I could call on those expertise to make recommendations if they were needed. So be prepared for that. Hey, if you're a SQL person, hey, good for you. If you can do that, it's not my thing, but maybe it's yours. No accounting for lunatics in this world.
Database admin is usually a lonely job.
Yeah.
Nobody, but everybody loves them when they when they need something. But
yeah.
Anyway, so all right, so a lot of good tools in there. Anything else we want to throw in on SQL injection before we wrap this one up?
If I was going to throw anything on to the end of this, because we didn't really demo anything in here, just because it just we've done that kind of well enough before. We've shown the tools. We showed the different tools that were in here that you had available. If you haven't seen it already, you should be going over to look at the CEH and look at what was discussed with SQL injections over there and the examples that were given. It will give you a good basic understanding of what a SQL injection actually is and what it looks like, so you can kind of get your head around that to at least get that level. The stuff in the CH is the most basic level you should have, a little bit more than that actually, but it's the good foundation you should have. You want to go beyond that and specialize in something like SQL or Oracle, then hey, more power to you. But yeah, if you want to kind of get that your head around what it is and what it looks like, then yeah, take a look at that stuff as soon as you can.
Very good. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, we hope you enjoyed watching this episode. I know we enjoyed filming it for you, if I can get that out. But signing off for IT Pro TV, I'm Mike Roderick.
And I'm Sean Ariano.
And we'll see you next time.